Coming up next on Tech News Weekly, it is our last live show of the year. Best of coming next week. But before we get there, 3 awesome interviews this week, starting with Netflix and kind of what it's doing to revitalize its business. We have Sarah Krouse from the Wall Street Journal talking about that. Some of the biggest ups and downs in the tech world of digital, everything digital. Well, David Carr from SimilarWeb has some really interesting insights there. Is Mastodon buckling under all of this attention that it's getting? Amanda Hoover from Wired joins us for that. And then finally, Mikah's story of the week has to do with a Girl Scouts mom who was kicked out of Madison Square Garden's Rockettes show thanks to facial recognition. All that and more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 265, recorded Thursday, December 22nd, 2022.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat that lets you listen in on 2 experienced technologists as they describe their building process and what they've learned from their experiences. Search for Code Comments in your podcast player.
And by Barracuda. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them every day. Phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, plus 10 more tricks cybercriminals use to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Get your free ebook at barracuda.com/TNW.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. Happy holidays. I am Mikah, Sargent, one of your hosts.
I'm the other guy, Jason Howell, looking around my room to see if my Santa hat is anywhere near me because I only just realized you're wearing yours and I'm not wearing mine. I am the Grinch today.
Look at me. I am the Grinch today. I've also got my tree in the background as well. So,
Dang.
Doing the whole thing.
You're living it up.
As it were.
That's right. This is the last live episode of Tech News Weekly for the year. We do have another episode lined up for next week. It'll be a best of some of our favorite interviews that we picked out from the year. But we've got some awesome interviews lined up for today. In fact, 3 of them. Normally we do 2, but today we're changing it up right at the end of the year. So let's jump in. Netflix. Okay, I've been a subscriber of Netflix for many years at this point. I think most people, that we have in our technology circles probably have. It's been a powerful force in streaming media. They've been instituting some changes that we talked about on this show, planning others to help turn around its subscriber count and kind of keep things, profitable as companies like to do. So how has that been going? We've got some changes kind of on the horizon. So joining us to talk about the latest is Sarah Krouse with the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's great to get you here. Thank you for hopping on. I know that this is like the point where we're all winding up and kind of tidying loose ends in order to get ready for the holiday break. So the fact that you're giving us 15 minutes of your time today is even more appreciated. So thank you.
Pleasure.
But it's really great to get you on. Let's start talking about kind of what's going on with Netflix right now. We've talked a little bit in the past about what some of their plans are. Now we're a few months kind of in, and we're kind of seeing some of the the developments here. Let's start with the subscription offering. Before last month, Netflix did not have a subscription offering with ads supporting the payments. Now we've had that for about a month. You wrote about an analytics firm and their report on how that's going for them. What exactly did they say?
So I wrote about antenna data on how Netflix's ad tier has been going. And what it found was in November, which albeit we're 1 month in, first month, that the ad-supported tier was the least popular of Netflix's 4 tiers of service during that month. And the plan accounted for 9% of new Netflix signups in the US during the period. So beneath that data was sort of a breakdown of what percentage of it was new customers who either had never been a Netflix customer before or were returning to join this plan versus those who were sort of shifting down from other Netflix plans. So about 60% of the subscribers to the ad-supported tier, 57%, were returning Netflix customers or new Netflix customers. So that figure is a sign that this offering is bringing in people or bringing back people that were deterred by the pricier plans. But I would say that overall, for this new tier to be the least expensive in the first month on the market is something that raises a question of how long it will take for Netflix to find its stride in this regard. And I should add, Netflix has said that there are some inaccuracies in the data that Antenna presented. They hadn't specified which. So we're left to deal with the industry data that we have.
Yeah, we at the end of the day, it's the data that we have. If Netflix isn't giving us anything to counter against it, then I guess this is what we go with. But you contrast in your article kind of the success of HBO Max in kind of spinning up their own ad-supported part of their business. And what struck me was the difference in the downgrades. You talked a little bit about the, kind of the different metrics that the report was pointing out. Downgrades, of course, being the thing that Netflix doesn't want. At the end of the day, they really want new users coming in, being enticed. Maybe they've been sitting on the fence like, oh, maybe I'll check out Netflix one of these days. The ad-supported tier comes along and it's a lesser price than they would pay otherwise, so they're lured in. But instead, we've got this higher percentage of downgrading users, which are users who were paying higher and now are saying, well, I'll pay less instead and get the ad-supported model. How that compares and contrasts to how HBO Max did in its first month. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, well, first of all, with Netflix, there are 3 other higher priced tiers of plans, and Netflix has said we don't mind so much if people move from the $9.99 basic plan into the ad tier because we'll get the monthly subscription of $6.99 plus ad revenue. So if people move from the $9.99 to that, not so bad. If they move from the standard or premium tiers, which go up to $20 a month, that is a problem. But when we look at how Netflix's ad tier did compared to HBO Max's, there were fewer downgrades overall. And there are a few reasons why that could be the case. It could be, that people assign more value to HBO content and are saying basically with their wallets that we're willing to pay a premium to not see ads in that. It could be that when HBO Max launched, so we're comparing Netflix's first launch month to HBO Max's, which was June of 2021. It could be that at that time, Warner Brother was doing a day and date premiere of movies on the streaming services as well as in theaters. And those films were only available to customers on the ad-free tier. They were not on the ad tier. That could have played a role in HBO's data. And it could just be that Netflix has more plans, period. And so that there was more opportunity to move from different tiers down to the ad tier.
Yeah. And the other part of this that struck me was looking at HBO Max. Now we've got the benefit of a year, more than a year's worth of development around its ad-supported tier. That's almost a quarter of their business with HBO Max is ad-supported. And it's impossible to tell the future, but is it likely? I mean, can we even make a guess as far as, whether Netflix is going to be on par? Like, is this just the kind of thing that across all streaming networks, if they've got an ad-supported tier, generally it's taking about that chunk, or might Netflix see less or more, or I don't know. What do you think?
There's a huge variety in the percentage among the other streamers that have ad-supported tiers. Peacock's is as high as 90% in the US. Wow. And so there's really variation that has to do with the value of the content assigned, the type of user that is signing up for that streaming service. If they're conditioned to have, maybe they watch a lot of cable and they are totally fine with commercials and they're used to it. So they are willing to pay less to see the content on the streaming platform, but are willing to watch ads. For Netflix, it's still very early days, so it's impossible to predict where this is going. But I do think that there are a number of factors that influence consumers' decisions. And Netflix has said themselves they may have different versions of ad tiers going forward. For now, for this sort of table stakes starting point, it is most comparable to their basic plan in that it's lower, it's still high definition, but is lower viewing quality than the higher price plans that Netflix offers. It also only allows one device of simultaneous viewing. So that's the most directly comparable plan. And I think once you have different ad tiers and features that are more comparable to the pricier plans that allow more simultaneous streams or have different resolutions or higher quality viewing, then you could start to see more movement too. So I would say that the success of this depends in some ways on the features that come about or how consumer preferences evolve.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that will be interesting. We'll have to do a year check-in next year and see how that worked out for him. The other prong of this, of course. Oh, yeah. Sorry, go.
I was going to say the other thing to keep in mind is we've talked about HBO Max, but you also have Disney Plus launching its ad-supported service for the first time in December. So something that I'm really interested to see how it plays out is how Netflix's ad-supported tier fares compared to how Disney Plus's ad-supported tier fares. Disney launched its in a slightly different way than Netflix. So Netflix has said, we want consumers to decide to join our ad-supported tier. So you can downgrade if you want, or you can come in new, but we want everybody who's in that tier to have opted in. The way Disney has launched theirs is in conjunction with a price hike. So they're moving the price from $7.99 a month to $10.99 a month if you want ad-free. If you don't want to pay that $10.99, you can stay at the $7.99 price point and see ads. So I suspect that just by nature of how they've structured that, there is a fair contingency of viewers that are going to stay in the ad tier. So they may start with a chunkier scale than Netflix, who is having people opt in.
Yeah, no question. That is a really good point. That'll be interesting to see. Now, the other aspect of this, of course, is password sharing, which is hilarious to me because for so long, Netflix, whether or not it was in their terms of service to not share, which I believe it was in their terms of service to not share, they were still putting out tweets, like the one that we're showing right now that basically encouraged it, or at least hinted heavily that it was okay. Difficult, Jeannie, to put that back into the bottle, of course, at this point. When might we expect this kind of password sharing crackdown to happen? It sounds like it's not very far. It might be right around the corner.
Yeah, it's not far off at this point. Early next year is when you can expect it. And Netflix has tried to do this really delicately. They know that it's a big change for consumers. They have tested a couple of different approaches this year in Latin America. And they've also created a couple of features for consumers that help them either transfer their profile if they were sharing an account to a new account so that you don't lose your viewing history and all your favorites. And then they have also created a new dashboard for account owners to see all of the devices that are logged into their accounts and the last time that those devices watched something. And for a few different customers that I've talked to, that dashboard has really opened their eyes to the extent of sharing that was happening on their account. Maybe they left an Airbnb logged in. I talked to somebody who sold a car or a Tesla that was still logged in and forgot about that. And so the dashboards are, I think, revealing to people the extent of the sharing that has built up over all this time. And so there may be some incremental logging out of those people, which could then prompt a moment where those previous moochers have to make the decision whether or not to get their own account. So you have that. And so heading into the early part of this year, we expect in the US for Netflix to sort of pick a game plan. It could look like what they've done most recently in Latin America, which is asking the primary account owner to pay a few dollars more per month to share with a person outside of their household. And Netflix has defined households as people who live together in one place. So if you had an account and shared it with your parents who live somewhere else, that would not be allowed, and you would have to pay more for them to do that.
Yeah, interesting. And then now we have some news this week that the UK Intellectual Property Office actually shared publicly that it sees password sharing as a crime. And I guess the curiosity here is, okay, is this one of those things where they kind of have to say that, or is there a possibility that password sharers for Netflix and other services, because I imagine this applies to any service where you're sharing a password and it's explicitly in the terms of service that you're not supposed to do that. I mean, what does this lead to? Sting operations down the line of password sharers, or I don't know, like how serious is this?
It's so interesting. To me, it's striking that you have a regulator explicitly pointing to this thing and saying, we consider this a problem and this is a crime. And they changed some of the wording over the last day or so. So initially it said something like password sharing on streaming services was listed as one of the things that is against the law. And it's been sort of evolved to accessing without paying a subscription. But I've seen news reports where the office has said basically the point of the matter is the same, which is that we consider it to be a crime or illegal to use an account that you don't pay for without a subscription. And it's interesting to me because it kind of touches on an important point of this conversation about password sharing. On the one hand, you have people who say Netflix encouraged it. It may have said something in their terms and conditions, but they didn't really crack down on it. And they seem to encourage it, citing that 2017 tweet. And everybody does it. And it's just a norm in society and how we live and stream. And then there's the other side of the coin that says, well, actually, like, this is content that's expensive to make. It's content that some people pay for. So it's not fair to have another subset of the world not paying for it. And that ultimately it equates in some ways to privacy is like the strongest way I've heard it explained to me. Those are two different worldviews. And so I think we're kind of in this moment where Netflix is trying to, bring it to the middle or limit the extent of the sharing and try to get paid incrementally more for the number of people that it can sort of convince to pay a few dollars.
Yeah, indeed. That's exactly where it's headed. It seems to me where their mind is.
Yeah, I mean, that said, do I think that like there's going to be sting operations related to password sharing? That seems hard to imagine unless it's really like a concerted, coordinated effort. It could be the kind of thing that a regulator is saying, like, we are firing this warning shot. And then in the future, if it detects something at scale or something that's really nefarious, it makes it easier to directly go after.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me, because I am, a child of the 80s, was, beta and VHS and all the tapes that you would rent. And at the very beginning of it, it was like, FBI warning, copying this tape is illegal and you'll go to jail and everything. And it was always the question of like, okay, like that, that's scary to read that, but how on earth would they know? Like, it's just a little different here. It's on the internet, but it's probably, and something like that is really geared, like exactly like you said, probably not for the individual, more so for like the larger scale coordinated thing. That's a lot easier for them to crack down on and recognize.
Yeah. I mean, and I suppose, there's always been the opportunity for these platforms themselves to police it. Do they want to necessarily? Yes and no. I mean, there's the big risk. There's financial upside if more people agree to pay a few dollars extra to share. There's also a tremendous downside risk if you erode the sort of brand affinity that people have or make people feel frustrated or angry with you as a company. And that you see that in the way that Netflix has tried to come about this really sort of gently at first is they don't want to anger their consumer base. They don't want to drive off people who are watching and liking their content. I mean, one of the good things about this for Netflix is they have 100 million people around the world that are watching their stuff and not paying for it. That's 100 million people that want to watch it. The challenge is getting those 100 million people to pay incrementally extra or become subscribers themselves.
Indeed. Well, Sarah, it's been a real pleasure getting the chance to talk with you today. And thank you for carving out some valuable time right before the holidays. I hope you have a wonderful holiday break. Sarah Krouse writes for the Wall Street Journal. And if people want to follow you online, where can they find you? Are you over on the Mastodon now, or are you doing Twitter, or what?
I am not yet. I'm still on Twitter by Sarah Krouse. You can also check me out at WSJ.com.
Right on. Thank you, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Thanks so much. Up next, we are going to take a look at some of the most popular sites, services, and trends of 2022. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by the Code Comments Podcast, an original podcast from Red Hat. When you're working on a project, you may be coding something, and you leave behind these small reminders in the code, those little comments. Those are, of course, code comments. And they're there to help you remember sort of what you were up to, but also if other people are looking at your code, they go, oh, that's what this line does. That's what this line does. This was the problem you were trying to solve. Well, this podcast, Code Comments, is all about taking that idea and letting you listen in on two experienced technologists as they describe their building process. There's a lot of work that is required to bring a project from whiteboard to actual development. And frankly, none of us can do it alone. The host, Burr Sutter, is a Red Hatter and lifelong developer advocate, as well as a community organizer. In each episode, Burr sits down with experienced technologists from across the industry to trade stories and talk about what they've learned from their experiences. The most recent episode is all about Cockroach Labs, which makes Cockroach DB. And in this episode, Ben Darnell talks about, the chief architect and co-founder of Cockroach Labs, talks about sort of the frustration that led to the creation of CockroachDB. And then what's super neat is you also get a little bit of insight into how Netflix, that huge company that is trying to push out video and content all over the globe, uses CockroachDB. So it ends up being a really fascinating look at kind of the reason for the creation of this service, and then some of the big players that are using it. Very interesting stuff. And of course, if you want to check out great episodes like that one that I listened to, you can do so by looking for Code Comments anywhere you listen to podcasts, or you can go to redhat.com/Code Comments Podcast. So search for Code Comments in your podcast player. And of course, we'll also include a link in the show notes. And our thanks to Code Comments for their support of Tech News Weekly and all of the TWiT network. Thank you, Code Comments. All right. As this is the final live episode of Tech News Weekly for the year, and as the year is coming to a close, I thought it'd be great to have a conversation about some of the trends of this year, some of the most interesting, or most, I should say, interested sites that were of interest to folks. And so joining us to talk about this very topic is the Senior Insights Manager at SimilarWeb. It's David Carr. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to get you here. So before we kind of get into the story here, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about SimilarWeb itself, and then your role there as the Senior Insights Manager.
Sure. So SimilarWeb is a company that does web metrics, and we help you compare your site against similar websites. That's says what it says on the tin, as the Brits say. So we gather information from around the internet and feed it into this big data model that does give you a good sense of how you're doing versus the competition. You can see how many visits and page views and how much time people spent on site for you versus a competitor. And if they're doing better than you, then you can get some clues about what they're doing better. So a lot of the use is from marketing managers who are trying to do just that. We also actually have a whole team of people who just works with hedge funds and investor types who are trying to get an early read on, say, what internet services are doing better than the competition, and they'll rank according to those sort of things. So, and so we always have a buzz of activity just before quarterly earnings come out that's related to that more investor-oriented perspective on different websites and services. And I was a tech journalist for many years. I hate to call myself a former journalist because I still think that way, but I'm working in a corporation. I'm seeing what stories we can find in the data and trying to bring them to the attention of different journalists. And we also get a lot of incoming requests from the Wall Street Journal, other major publications and smaller publications too, where we'll try and dig up some newsworthy information for them. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about Twitter and Mastodon and some of those things lately.
For sure. So yeah, I have to say it was just kind of fun to go to the site and type in a URL and see what was available there. And you folks kind of pull in a lot of different data that is helpful, even for me, just kind of learning about something. So I was fascinated that even as a person, I didn't, there was no account I just needed to sign up for or anything like that. Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot you can get through the free site. I mean, obviously we do have something to sell where we're trying to get people to upgrade, but we give you a pretty good taste of what's available for free.
Absolutely. Now, starting with social media, because you just mentioned it, and I think that has been a big conversation topic this year. Let's chat about Mastodon. So when I look at the people that I follow online, tend to be journalists and tech folks, it does seem like everybody's moving over to Mastodon from Twitter. But I'm curious, from what you've learned, do the numbers suggest that's true? Is that the case? And it really seems like this may have happened. I wonder why in the past 2 to 3 months. I was hoping you could provide some insight on that as well.
Well, sure. I don't know whether it's exactly moving. It's more like tiptoeing. It's, 1 foot on the platform, the other foot on the train. They're checking out what the alternative would be. And I don't know if you can show I sent over a chart showing how
we did link
Mastodon
that, so
has taken off. And the first thing we looked at was just how many people are going to mastodon.social. And then there's another site called joinmastodon.org. So it's a little bit complicated where you're trying to choose what server you want to be on. And I think that's one of the things that's going to get in the way of it as if you could kind of zoom in on the chart on the left there. So those two specific domains are the ones at the bottom of the chart, and they did take off like a rocket around the time that Musk took over, with another surge around the time of a lot of articles coming out saying, what is Mastodon? How do you join? But those two domains are just jumping off points to this broader network that includes thousands of websites, thousands of domains. So I was able to get a couple of hundred of the largest ones, and so that's the blue line, just showing how that activity has taken off. So it's interesting, I'm spending more time on Mastodon. I'm still in the category of the people who hasn't gone through the process of deactivating my Twitter account or anything like that just yet. Because things may change, things may turn around, but it's a little bit of a blast from the past where it is more like Twitter was in early 2000s, before it had gotten quite so algorithmic, where you really just did have a reverse chronological feed, and what you saw was based on what your contacts shared. And now it's gimmicked up a little bit more, sometimes maybe in unhealthy ways. So this actually gives us an opportunity to go back and curate our own social feed and take control of it to a greater extent. So
absolutely.
I'm kind of into the rhetoric of it too.
And see, I think that's that benefit of having worked primarily as a journalist for so long does give you the ability to kind of dive into, because of course with this huge stream of data, to be able to take that, and even I'm glad that you've got that aggregated look as well, because that is for the people who are super Mastodon minded. They tend to go, oh, but you forgot that there are all these little servers that exist, and so you didn't forget that, which is great to include that as well.
I guess, I think the latest statistic I heard was something like 5,000 servers now, but some of them can be just one person. They just set it up for them, or them and their two closest friends. So it's more like back to the stage when everybody had their own email server, but also. Email is a federated system. We don't all have to be on the same email server to send email to each other. We've moved on a little bit from the days of CompuServe and AOL, where you're in your little box. Well, I don't know if I go back that far. Some other people may not, but.
So one of the other insights you have, and there's a chart that you've included from our person running the boards. It's one of the final tabs that says Twitter quitters. Can you tell us how you can even figure out who might be quitting? And I think this is very clever, the way that you've figured this out.
And so, this is something that you do need to get into the paid version to be able to do this, but you can segment out specific pages that people visited, people landed on. And of course, we're sampling data and extrapolating, but still, we're able to capture enough of the activity of people going to, this is the page that you land on after you're not only thinking about it, but you clicked, yes, I really want to get rid of my Twitter account. I want nothing to do with this anymore. So when you get to the confirmation page, that's what we're tracking here. similar to in a lot of e-commerce analysis, we'll be following people through the checkout process and trying to see how many people get to the end of the funnel. Now, I have done other analysis where I've compared this with the number of people who are signing up, and I just looked at this today. So in November, even though that number of people quitting was significant, there's about 3 times as many signing up.
Interesting.
So we have to keep some perspective that for everybody who is turned off by Musk and Musk policies, there are other people who are attracted. Maybe some of them for the wrong reasons, but maybe some of them just because they're hearing more about it in the news. And I never had a Twitter account. I wonder what's going on over there. It sort of does go back to that journalistic. Well, I guess it's more of a PR or marketing maxim of just spell our name right and we'll be happy.
Well, I think the power of FOMO is not to be discounted. That's for sure. Moving on to AI. This, of course, is a big category. We have covered a lot of stories here on Tech News Weekly about DALL-E 2. We had some of the engineers from DALL-E 2 on to talk about that. We've talked about ChatGPT. I did an interview with ChatGPT and other AI art. So I'm curious, when did these AI engines start to really take off? And do you expect more growth, or do you think the popularity is going to start to kind of level off as we go into the new year?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, some leveling off. DALL-E from OpenAI was the one that first really caught my attention. And we definitely did see a big spike. I think around June was when they opened it up to anybody could get an account. And a lot of people did and started playing around with it. And I use it for featured images for blog posts sometimes, where I can't find a piece of clip art, so I just describe one, and we get to see that. ChatGPT has blown up even bigger, I think, because it's sort of simpler to interact with, and I think there's maybe some leveling off there that I've seen in the daily numbers since we first got this wave of all the news coverage about it. But it's certainly very interesting, and I played around with it in terms of you can get it to. I had it write a JavaScript routine. I think I also tried a PHP routine for calculating the dates of holidays for any given year. And it comes back with a bit of sample code, and it also explains to you how it got that sample code.
Yep, code comments included.
My boss had it write a song in the style of Taylor Swift, lamenting what had happened with Ticketmaster sales. So, which was something else that we wrote about at one point. So you definitely can. I think of it actually as something that means writer's block will be a thing of the past. I don't want it to take over my job, but if I was stuck, I might go to it and feed in a bunch of facts and say, how would you start this story? See what it comes back with. Couldn't hurt.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a fun kind of jumping off point for those different things. And I'm not surprised, like you've said, with the trends sort of taking off even more because of the simplicity. I've got a text box. I type into it. I can talk to it like it's human, as if it were human. It's not as tough as you've got to word things in this way and use these special, words and things like that to get.
Also, I don't know that there's another one that's really comparable and public and easily accessible right now. Whereas with DALL-E, I think people started, were very interested in that, but then they also heard about Stable Diffusion and a bunch of others. So, and of course, OpenAI, I think until recently was more of something that you had to be an AI or statistics geek to know about. Very interesting to technologists wanting to see what that family of technologies could do. and I have no idea whether they really. I don't think they necessarily want to be a mass market consumer products company, but I don't know if the opportunity is there. Well, it's actually set up under a nonprofit structure. It's supposed to be creating AI for good. So,
yeah, it is interesting how there's been sort of this. I like that what they are doing by showing these different projects ends up kind of teaching the public about AI a little bit more. And I think that's what's more behind it is the education. But wow, I think the price gets very expensive very quickly when it comes to hosting something like ChatGPT online as they're doing, as opposed to just the technologists who have it running locally. Now,
and I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I imagine that traffic to OpenAI.com was not terribly extraordinary until recently, and so they had to scale up quickly. I mean, I have gotten error messages where it seems like the thing is overloaded occasionally, but it's done remarkably well.
Absolutely. One other topic that I wanted to talk to you about, Carvana I've seen some stories as of late, and I'm curious if you have any insight into the popularity of the service. Of course, this is an online used car retailer. Are you seeing more people using it, fewer people using it, or rather visiting the sites as your data shows?
Well, I think it's in the category of a lot of e-commerce and online enabled services that partly they're just suffering through very difficult comparisons between how they were doing in the pandemic time period when everything had to be online. I think that's a large part of the story, more than necessarily any mismanagement of the company. But it definitely has taken a dent. And I know I suggested that as one of the things I could talk about, but it's not one that I personally researched. I quickly reviewed what my colleague had written up on it. Mm-hmm. But I would just make that broader point that certainly in terms of stocks as well as web traffic, everybody's suffering by tough comparisons in that very digital marketplace.
Absolutely. Now, lastly, I was hoping that you could tell us about some other insights and trends that you may have come across, ones that you think are worth mentioning before we let you go.
Sure. I also did something during the year about Notion, the collaboration and note-taking tool. And I do enjoy a graph that just goes straight on up and to the right. You don't see them that often, and Notion is on that kind of trajectory.
Can you show that graph,
now.
John? We've got that.
I think you may have that somewhere. Yeah, and so it was an interesting one, and it's a tool that I've used myself. One of these things that sort of is in the same category as an Evernote in terms of a personal productivity tool, although they do also have collaboration features built into it. It's okay. I think up and to the right is probably the only image you really need to go that.
There it is.
Yes. I did also do something on WordPress where, I'm a WordPress fanboy. I write plugins. I work with WordPress. Both like its open source ethos, but there was some statistic that had come out from somewhere else recently saying that for the first time in a decade and a half or whatever, the percentage of websites around the internet running WordPress had declined. And we were able to see that traffic to both WordPress.com and WordPress.org, which is where you go to get the open source software, they're both on the decline. When I pulled the data more recently, I did see an increase actually in WordPress.org traffic. So those are the people who are engaging with the open source version. It's just very recent, but I would tend to attribute it to the fact that some of their technology for being able to edit the entire website, so all the navigation, all the basically edit the whole template rather than just edit an individual blog post. To be able to do that all through their editor seems to have improved dramatically recently, and the performance, which maybe 10,000. I don't know how many thousand lines of JavaScript code, but the performance of the editor maybe had been a little bit bogged down. Now it seems to be moving and pretty snappy. And so, that's that yellow line you see there. That's on the right. That's month over month change, and it's just edging into the positive territory for WordPress.org. WordPress.com is still a little bit in the basement. And the company behind WordPress, Automatic, has other ways of making money. So maybe they're capitalizing on those. I don't know. They haven't come back with any commentary about that kind of research. But I thought it was interesting.
Absolutely. And I think, too, with folks looking, they considered Twitter at one point to kind of be the place where they did the micro blogging or the blogging. And there's been I've seen, especially among, again, journos and techie folks going, I'm just going to have my own blog and then I'm not going to worry about all this other stuff. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are making use of the tools, especially the open source tools that WordPress provides as a way to start their own blog now.
Although you still tend to need Twitter or Mastodon or something to get people to pay attention to the blog. Otherwise, it will die.
It's just there. Exactly. It's there in the background. David, Carr, I want to thank you so much for your time today, for joining us. Of course, folks can head to similarweb.com to see some of your insights. But if they want to follow you online, you haven't closed down that Twitter account yet. Where can they find you? I'm
David F. Carr, pretty much everywhere. So, and on Mastodon, I would be, I wound up on Nerd Culture, at Nerd Culture, at David F. Carr, nerdculture.de. And I don't know how I ended up on a German server, but I just picking quickly. They tell me you can change that, but
yes, I had another friend who ended up on the German one as well. So it's a pretty common thing. David, happy holidays to you and yours, and thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David. Coming up, we're going to continue talking about Mastodon. What can I say? It's in the air right now, and how it's doing under the weight of all of this new attention. That's coming up. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. In a recent email trends survey, 43% of respondents said that they have been victims of a spear phishing attack, but only 23% said they have dedicated spear phishing protection. Sounds a little bit out of balance, right? How are you keeping your email secure? Well, Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them every day. We're talking phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, all the other baddies that you've heard of plenty of times on this network. Plus 10 more tricks cybercriminals use to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Are you protected against all 13 types? Well, email cybercrime, it's becoming incredibly sophisticated. Attacks are more difficult to prevent than ever. Attacks use social engineering, which is just incredibly complicated to protect against, including urgency and fear to prey on victims. Social engineering attacks, that includes things like spear phishing and business email compromise. That costs businesses an average of $130,000 per incident. High cost for missing that one. As demand for COVID-19 tests increased at the start of 2022, Barracuda researchers saw an increase in COVID-19 test-related phishing attacks, right? They're always kind of looking for the hot new kind of trend or thing to latch onto. They saw that increase by 521%. between October and January. As public interest rises, for example, in cryptocurrency, that's another fantastic example. The opportunity for attacks becomes incredibly ripe. There's a lot to find there as the price of Bitcoin increased by almost 400% between October 2020 and April 2021. Barracuda research found that impersonation attacks grew 192% in the same period. They're all trying to get at that valuable end game right there. In 2020, the Internet Crime Complaint Center received 19,369 business email compromise complaints with adjusted losses of over $1.8 billion. So securing email at the gateway level, it's just not enough anymore. It's still important to leverage gateway security, of course, so you can protect against traditional attacks, things like viruses, zero-day ransomware, spam, all those other threats. But your gateway is defenseless against targeted attacks. Those are really damaging. Protection at the inbox level, including AI and machine learning, it's necessary to detect and then stop the most sophisticated threats. And that's why Barracuda is awesome. You can get a free copy of the Barracuda Report, 13 email threat types to know about. And you can get that right now. You'll see how the cyber criminals are actually getting more and more sophisticated every day, and then how you can build the best protection for your business, for your data, and your people with Barracuda. Find out about the 13 email threat types you need to know about and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook right now. You can go to barracuda.com/TNW. That's barracuda.com/TNW. Barracuda, your journey secured. And we thank them for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right. So as we told you earlier, we've got 3 interviews today, and I'm really excited for this one. Anyone who's been watching our shows, and in particular, the last interview especially, knows that the whole Twitter Elon Musk shadow has been impossible to ignore. And one bit of respite for that news has been the surge in attention for Mastodon. And we have, by the way, our own instance, twit.social. So that's happening. That's what I signed up under anyways. It's seen a massive uptick in activity in recent months. But how is Mastodon doing with all of this new attention and all of this influx of people checking it out, kicking the tires, seeing if it's working for them? Joining us to discuss this is Amanda Hoover, staff writer at Wired.com. Amanda wrote the article, Mastodon is hurtling toward a tipping point. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. And again, I know we're right on the cusp of the holidays, so taking 15 minutes out of your day, we just totally appreciate you joining us. So first of all, talk a little bit about the kind of the fundamental differences between a social network like Twitter and Mastodon, whether they are similar or not. Right now, especially with everything happening with Twitter and people, checking out other services, they're being compared all over the place. Are they comparable? What are those differences?
They're comparable in that they're microblogging platforms. So people can go here and post very short messages. They can follow one another. They can reshare messages similar to retweeting, but they're very different in their construction. Unlike Twitter, which is a centralized platform now owned by the world's richest man who can make unilateral decisions, as we've seen, Mastodon is a decentralized open source platform. So it operates across many different servers. They're run by different volunteers who've wanted to start these servers. It's been around since about 2016, and it was pretty quiet, pretty niche, but it has really seen an explosion in users. They're up to about 2.5 million monthly active users as of the last week or so. That number could have even changed more recently, but that's a huge growth for a service like this. Twitter has hundreds of millions of users, but for this platform that a lot of people had never heard of, that's explosive in such a short amount of time.
And it's not just that there are a lot of users coming over. It's also about, this word that we're throwing around, these instances, like twit.social is an instance of Mastodon. It's just kind of how part of this open architecture works. So there, and when we look at that, then we realize that a company like Twitter, owned and operated by Elon Musk currently. A lot of that funding the effort happens, and anything bad that happens falls on the shoulders of Elon Musk at the very top of that tree, of which there's been a lot. With Mastodon, you've got a lot of people operating these instances. So they're the ones, like, are they the ones that are footing the bill entirely and having to manage all of the really complicated stuff that a social network normally has to?
Pretty much. A lot of them do crowdfund. They have Patreons. They seek donations from their users to keep them going. And a lot of them have done that. But especially a lot of donations have gone up a lot as more people have used these, because running these servers isn't necessarily cheap. A person I spoke to for this article told me that he was spending about £100. He was in the UK. A month prior to the giant influx of users he's seen to keep the server online. And, he was happy to do that, maybe only getting a small portion of his costs covered by donations. Since his donations have gone up a lot more, they have more operating costs in the bank to keep going for a few months and maybe worry about that a little bit less. But with so many new users coming in, I've spoken to other instance runners and instance admins who have had to upgrade because the servers that they had were just crashing. They weren't enough to sustain the amount of activity that was suddenly happening, because it's not just the signups and getting through all of that. It's the amount of posts and activity increased so much every single day on these instances that have tens of thousands, some of them more than 100,000 users signed up now.
Right. That's a lot for a person who decides to spin up an instance, because, this is curious. I could do that. Suddenly you're faced with 100,000 users. It's a whole different story. Now, Eugene Rochko actually built Mastodon back in 2016. And if the cost to run an instance is actually footed by the person who launches it, as we're talking about, and not Eugene, not the people behind Mastodon, but the people who decide, hey, I want to spin up twit.social or whatever, what kind of impact do the creators of Mastodon, Eugene and others behind the company, actually have to encourage consistent, healthy growth of the platform when these things are kind of individualized?
Yeah, I think that they've been a little bit overwhelmed. I know that he was working 14-hour days, trying to make a ton of improvements, trying to keep things online. There is a nonprofit that he runs that kind of oversees some funding for Mastodon generally, or covers some of his costs. But it's been a huge lift for a lot of people. Mastodon is a small team, and then the instance runners, there are thousands of them, but a lot of them are working in small teams as well. So this network, what's so different about it, when you compare it to Twitter's goal is to make money. They have advertising, they have investors, that has always been the goal of a platform like Twitter and so many other centralized social media platforms. Mastodon really seems to be a labor of love for so many people. They are very attached to their instances, to their communities there. They're really attached to the idea and very supportive of it. Everyone that I've spoken to that runs an instance really does it because they love it and they want that community feel. And they also want the on instances they can control a lot more and moderate the content, so they can make rules that keep hate speech out and harassment. So a lot of people, I think, never thought it would grow to this point, and they're sort of all seeing how this shakes out.
I think you're bringing up the moderation aspect, and that's really top of mind for me, right? When I think of social networks and social media in general, not just Twitter, I'm also talking about Facebook and TikTok and all of them. We have read countless stories about the challenges, the difficulty, the amount of people required in order to successfully and properly moderate and keep these platforms safe, not just from hate speech, of course, but from CSAM, from child sexual exploitation material, things like this, the really hard stuff. So how is that done when we're looking at a federated instance by a random person who says, I'm going to start up my own instance, and then I have to imagine some of them are faced with these similar challenges that can be almost scarring to a certain degree for a lot of people who have had to moderate around them. Now it's just in the hands of anyone who decides to spin up an instance. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to a few attorneys this week who really explained that you become more than a user when you start an instance. You're essentially becoming your own internet service provider, and you have to abide by the same kind of rules that exist for running a platform like Twitter. Copyright is a big one. Register, and it just takes a few minutes. They just have to register to be compliant under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Which it doesn't cost very much money. It doesn't take very much time, and they just have to agree to remove copyrighted material. But if someone neglects to do that, which a lot of people I think don't know that law very well because they've never had reason to be aware of it, if they weren't running something, they could be on the hook for lawsuits. It's the same. They have to follow rules about children 13 and younger signing up and collecting data. They have to, if they come across child sexual exploitation material, they are mandated to report that. So there are a lot of issues that come up that people just need to be aware of. Attorneys say, these aren't impossible for a small team to do. They just have to understand the laws around what they're working with. But they also, in addition to those were just US laws. If your server is available in other countries, you are liable to the regulations there as well. And that Europe has different rules, rules even can change state by state for certain things. So it is a bit daunting, but there are attorneys who are working in this space, who are hearing from people running instances, and it's possible to abide by all of these as a small instance.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And again, I will just point to the fact that we have our own instance, so it's not like I'd have to go very far to ask how that goes. But it's very controlled, right? Leo Laporte has said many times on the shows, like, in order to get access to this instance, you got to let me know that you are a fan of the network, that you watch our shows, because he's not just letting anyone in, and that in itself has the opportunity to filter out a lot of what might come, in this kind of unmoderated space, that sort of thing. If someone is running an instance and all of this is just too much for them, say, that their user base is built up, they can't afford it, they don't want to deal with the headache anymore, and the instance goes away, like, what happens to all those users who open their accounts through that instance? That's a question that I've had for a while.
Yeah, it is possible to move your account from one instance to another if you download your data. You can start over. There's some directions on how to do that on Mastodon's website. Also, as well, when you're going to join Mastodon, and you go to their main page that has some instances listed, those are involved in an agreement. They've agreed to moderate for certain things, and they've also agreed to give 3 months notice if they're ever going to shut down the instance, which gives people more time to migrate. So some of those are the bigger ones that a lot of people have joined. And that's something that was in place prior to the big rush of people. It was a safeguard that was in there just based on the nature of the service. But we're seeing as well, concern that Twitter combusts and everyone's data is going to be gone and lost, and we'll lose this whole era of internet history and also world history that's really been documented on Twitter. So centralized platforms aren't necessarily, guaranteed to be around forever either. And Mastodon does have some safeguards in the idea that no one person can ever own it, and that it could be, continued on by those who still want to be involved.
Yeah. Well, I can say from my limited experience with it in the last, I'd say a couple of months at this point, is that it's been kind of a refreshing change. Like, yes, it's less total people, but the people that are there are very engaged, and things kind of stay on topic, and they don't get all squirrely the way I had gotten so adapted to Twitter just going in all of these directions that, like, I really didn't want to go. And I'm just not seeing that on Mastodon yet. Maybe that's a matter of this kind of like smaller, kind of more controlled, instance sort of approach. Maybe it's just the fact that there's less users. I hope it doesn't go there, but who the heck knows? But anyways, I'm having a lot of fun with there. Are you on Mastodon? If people want to follow you on Mastodon, can they find you?
I am. I'm at Amanda Hoover. You can find me there. I, just started. I'm building up my network. I started in November, but it's been a slower build up, and I'm seeing more and more reporters or just other people that I know and sources, making their way over there over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, it's certainly happening quite a bit, especially like in the journalism and, podcasting circles and everything like that. For what that means, I don't know. But anyways, Amanda, thank you so much for carving out some time for us today. Amanda, of course, writes for Wired.com. You can search for Amanda Hoover there. And then, of course, you can find her on Mastodon, as she said. Thank you again. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Take care. All right, Mikah, over to you. You've got a story of the week, and this was a topic that I was searching for an interview around as well. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So this was an interesting story. Multiple sites had picked up on it, but there's an attorney, Kelly Conlon, and Conlon had gone to the Radio City Music Hall with Conlon's daughter to see the Rockettes. I guess the Girl Scout troop was going to see the Rockettes. And Conlon says that when she got into the Radio City Music Hall, so, you go through the metal detector and, get ready to go in, there was a guard, or actually multiple guards, who came up to Conlon and said, according to Conlon, quote, "Our recognition picked you up." Conlon was then escorted outside and had to wait outside while her daughter and the Girl Scout troop watched the Radio City Music Hall's Rockettes show. And the reason for this is because the company that owns the Radio City Music Hall, called Madison Square Garden Entertainment, is currently in the midst of a lawsuit with the law office for which Kelly Conlon works. So again, an attorney works for a law office. That law office is involved in a lawsuit with Madison Square Garden Entertainment, which owns the Radio City Music Hall, and made Kelly Conlon leave because there was, that conflict of interest or what have you. Now, what is fascinating about this is, there are a couple of things actually that are fascinating about this. First of all, and I'm going to call it MSGE from now on. It's Madison Square Garden Entertainment. MSGE, they will not, it seems, confirm that the attorney was facially recognized. They won't confirm that facial recognition was involved with Conlon. However, the company will confirm that it does use facial recognition. And in fact, if you go into the Radio City Music Hall, there are signs that say that facial recognition is involved in what they're doing. The company says it's about safety, of course, and all of that. But based on what the guards are reported to have said, and the fact that they use facial recognition, we can start to kind of see that it's likely that facial recognition was used in the process to determine that Kelly Conlon had arrived on scene and was not allowed to attend. Because when Kelly Conlon was talking to the guards, she says that they already knew her name. They knew the law office that she worked for. And as I said, they said, apparently, our recognition picked you up. What is also interesting is that Conlon does not work on the case involving the Madison Square Garden Entertainment Company. But because she works at the firm, that is why she was escorted off the premises and not allowed to attend the event. Now, judges are not happy about this. And I'm going to read a little bit from the Verge article because I think that it very clearly points things out. The policy has been controversial from a legal standpoint. When lawyers from another case brought it up, Judge Kathleen McCormick, who happens to be the judge that presided over 2 Elon Musk cases, called it, quote, "the stupidest thing I've ever read." Another judge in an entirely separate case actually ruled, quote, "plaintiffs may not be denied entry into any shows where they possess a valid ticket." So MSG Entertainment is not supposed to be able to stop someone who has a valid ticket from entering the event. What is allowed, according to this other judge, is for the ticket to not be sold in the first place. So if this is their policy, which one judge says is the stupidest thing I've ever read, then they are allowed to keep certain people from buying tickets. But if that person has a valid ticket, then this judge says they have to be allowed to attend the event. Despite that ruling, MSG continued to tell law firms that they could not go on the premises and that those tickets could be revoked at any time. So there's now, on top of the legislation that's going on, or not the legislation, but the litigation that's going on involving MSG in the first place, it seems like there may be more cases going forward as they try to get MSG to be compliant in the ruling of what's going on here. But of course, this all boils down from the tech standpoint to a conversation about facial recognition and how it can be used in these different ways. Because if it is, also MSG won't say what company they're using for facial recognition technology, but if it's being used for quote unquote the public safety, and it is, I don't know, somehow tied into databases of law enforcement, and so therefore they can find people who are, I don't know, accused of different crimes or what have you. That is one aspect. But this is potentially another aspect where every single person is being identified, having their name run, and then if they're an enemy of the company, then they are, accosted by the guards and asked to leave the premises. That is where, of course, you've got your privacy advocates having a conversation about the sort of overreach, a potential overreach that could be here. And it makes me wonder, if Conlon had been wearing some of those glasses that fool the AI, if she would have been able to attend this concert, but in the end had to wait outside while her daughter and the rest of the Girl Scout troops did the event. So yeah, it's just an interesting use of the technology. And an interesting shirking of a ruling that was already in place, I think here is the other kind of concern. If you've already been told you have to do this thing and you're not doing this thing, not a good look. So I'm curious your thoughts on this, Jason.
Yeah, I don't know. As I'm kind of like, reading and listening and everything, kind of find myself a little conflicted, at the core, I know that I can identify within myself that facial recognition just happening out in the world and then action happening based on that, feels icky to me. Not because I don't want people who are really doing bad things caught, but because that is the best thing that could happen from that. And there are a lot of really bad things that also happen when that is acceptable. So there's that, right? Facial recognition on its surface as a way to identify people who are just walking the world. I feel a little sketch about that from the beginning. At the same time, I can also understand if a company is or a person or whatever, the owner of a business, if that company is litigating around something and they want to be sure to protect themselves to not, then there is a right there, I think, for them to be cautious about who they let in, like on one hand, it kind of feels like overreach to say anyone from the firm. And meanwhile, she's not actually working on the case, but she is part of the firm. So therefore she's not let out. On the other hand, I mean, litigation, there's a lot of consequence around that. So who are they to say, who is the group of attorneys to say, oh no, but don't worry. She's just going in there to watch the Rockettes show and not some other, reason, rationale or whatever. So I'm a little conflicted on it, but I think at the core though, residing over all of that confliction is just the fact that facial recognition used in this way just always gives me a really icky feeling.
I'm with you, because I also feel that conflict. Yeah, I feel that.
I don't even know if that's a word. Confliction. I don't know.
I feel that conflict in the sense that it is, if there is concern that, somebody could be spying or what have you, then I get it. I get why they have that, the desire to not have somebody come in, but it's when it's on this kind of individual scale, that's where these little stories kind of go, oh man, I hadn't thought about how that could be, how it could go this way or it could go that way. And you kind of go, oof, that stinks for this individual person who's not even involved in the case in the first place.
Yeah. And I don't think this is the only time that we hear about that either, right? Like these are the things that I think as more and more facial recognition systems are deployed and used in these ways, we hear more and more of this stuff. And then we start to really kind of move into the territory that makes me very nervous about just widespread facial recognition systems everywhere, identifying everyone's every move through this world. Kind of it gets really messy, and there is some good that comes out of that, but there's also a lot of bad that I think it just goes part and parcel with it. And
absolutely,
you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that stuff just because it does catch some criminals. So yeah, conflicted on that.
Same. We end with conflict today.
Yes, we are going to wrap up this conflicted feeling that we're feeling right now and go ahead and say goodbye for the year as far as live Tech News Weekly, live recorded shows are concerned. Like I said earlier, this is the last one. There will be an episode in the feed next Thursday. So twit.tv/TNW. You'll get some of our favorite interviews from the year. Mike and I picked out some, and that'll be our best of. So look for that. The following week, I think, Mikah, you're actually out the first episode of the new year. So I'm going to be solo. So we'll get a bunch of, I will miss you, first of all, but we will get a bunch of interviews on that show to fill the void of Mikah. But he'll be back the following week. So
yes, I will be back soon after that. So then we'll lock things in for the rest of the year. No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Is it my turn? Do I say my
It's your
part
turn.
now? See, look, I'm already ready to start the end of the year. If you'd like to get all of our shows ad-free, you can do that and help support the network by joining Club Twit at twit.tv/clubtwit. There you will find the option to subscribe starting at $7 a month or $84 a year. And when you do, you get every single Twit show with no ads because you are in turn supporting the content. So no sponsors there. You get access to the Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else. Behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, all that kind of magic, as well as access to the members-only Discord server, which is a fun place to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and also those of us here at Twit. We'd love to have you join the club, starting at $7 a month, $84 a year. And when you do so, it doesn't stop there. You also get access to the Untitled Linux Show, which, as you might imagine, is a show all about Linux. You get access to Hands on Windows, which is Paul Thurrott's short format show about Windows tips and tricks, and a show featuring yours truly, Hands on Mac, where I give you all sorts of tips and tricks about using your Apple devices. So that is a great place, or rather a great extra package that you get just as part of your Club Twit subscription. So we really try to make this a very valuable subscription to you. And in return, we thank you for supporting the network and the shows that we make. If you would like to follow me online, I'm at Mikah Sargent on many social media networks, including Mastodon. You can also check out chihuahua.coffee. That's CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. You can catch Hands on Mac later today, where I'm talking about the Freeform app that just made its way onto your iPhones and iPads. You can also check out, coming in the new year, on Sundays, Ask the Tech Guys, the show that I'm doing with Leo Laporte, where we take your questions and your tech questions, do our best to answer those. And Tuesdays for iOS Today, which I record with Rosemary Orchard. So lots of places to tune in and hang out, and we appreciate you. Jason Howell, what about you?
Well, I am still on the Twitters, so at Jason Howell. I'm also on the Mastodons, so twit.social/@Jason Howell if you want to just jump right to my profile and add me over there. I will look forward to seeing you either place. It doesn't matter to me. Big thanks to John Ashley at the studio for a year of awesomeness. Big thanks to Burke for testing things behind the scenes. Also a year of awesomeness. Everyone behind the scenes, actually, who helps us do the show each and every week, whether I've named you or not. Thank you. And to you who continue to watch and listen to us as we interview and talk with each other about the week's biggest tech news. Thank you. We appreciate you. And we will see you next week with the best of, and in the new year with a new live episode. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, but your game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. And you already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.